At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aurum. Let's begin. Perfection has a tell. It's a clean, rhythmic hum, a predictable cadence that echoes from a spinning neutron star to the synchronized pistons of a fusion engine. Ryland Miles spent his life on Larkspur 9, listening for the tells of failing machines, on a moon where gravity was less a constant and more a moody suggestion. He could hear the microfracture in a support beam before it groaned, feel the off-kilter wobble of a bearing about to seize. Here, in the orientation hall of Iron March Academy, where the polished walls reflected light without warmth, he recognized that same hum in the clockwork motions of Instructor Zenid. Ryland stood amidst a gallery of the galaxy's finest and felt as welcome as a hull rat in a cockpit. The air smelled expensive, scrubbed of personality and scented with the sharp scent of superheated silicates from the hard light emitters and the sterile bite of antiseptic on the training mats. They saw a token human, a political appointment, a walking experiment everyone expected to fail spectacularly. A menagerie of predatory grace surrounded him, bipeds, quadrupeds, and one being that resembled a column of roiling intelligent gas held in a localized gravity field. They all watched the hall's center with a reverence that bordered on religious, the kind saved for deities or a sudden open bar. Zenid occupied the center. His species, the Vathuri, looked carved from polished, living volcanic glass. 4 arms, each ending in biolaminate blades honed to a monomolecular edge, moved through a series of interlocking arcs. He demonstrated the Vathuri unbreakable form, a martial art so refined it felt less like a style and more like a moving proof of a complex physics theorem. Every strike was a pure vector, every block a flawless intersection of planes. His form left no wasted energy. Each movement was a final, unanswerable statement. The students were rapt. A feathered, avian-like Finarin beside Ryland named Kakiri Vangars watched with analytical intensity, her head tilting as she mentally calculated the force distribution of each blow. Across the room, a Vask named Sariel watched with the smug satisfaction of someone who already aced the final exam. Her species possessed hyper-flexible ligaments and multi-jointed limbs. She resembled a ribbon of liquid death, even when standing still. She saw Zenid's form and recognized its step-by-step brilliance as her own birthright. Ryland watched differently. He saw something other than a warrior. He saw a gyro-stabilizer designed for a zero-G vacuum, flawless in its intended environment, but fatally unprepared for a sudden jolt of turbulence. He saw the patterns, beautiful, repeatable, and therefore predictable. The form had rhythm, but no soul. A perfect system awaited a wrench in its works, and Ryland Miles was an excellent wrench. The demonstration concluded with a final, resonant poise that hummed with contained energy. The rustling and whispered commentary of the students ceased. Zenid straightened, his eyes sweeping the room. They passed over the eager, the intimidated, and the arrogant, before finally landing on Ryland. His expression settled into one of weary academic duty.
"A volunteer for the drill,"
Zenid announced, his voice a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in Ryland's bones. He ignored any potential hands. His gaze remained fixed.
"The human, Mr. Miles, center mat."
Whispers slithered through the assembled students. The experiment began. Ryland felt 100 pairs of eyes on him as he walked forward, his stride loose and easy, a stark contrast to the coiled tension of everyone else. He felt less like a student and more like the before picture in a cautionary advertisement.
The drill is a simple one,
Zenith explained, his tone patient, as if speaking to a child.
A balance break. The first character in the first sentence of combat's language. A universal principle exploiting the center of gravity of any bipedal form.
Ryland gave a non-committal shrug. Sounds peachy. Zariel smirked from the sidelines. Kachiri leaned forward, her analytical mind eager for the baseline data on human biomechanics. Zenid took his stance, a sculpture of impending force, a study in kinetic potential. He moved in, his motion as smooth and inexorable as a tide, a controlled, flowing attack that had, by Iron March Academy's records, worked without fail on every new student for the past 112 standard years. Zenid applied a calculated amount of force to the micronewton needed to disrupt a bipedal form of Ryland's estimated mass and skeletal structure. He anticipated resistance. He anticipated a tense-up, a panicked bracing, the instinctive reactions of a body maintaining its balance. A student who resisted would be thrown cleanly. A student who tried to dodge would be off balance and then thrown. A flawless binary trap. Ryland neither resisted nor dodged. He did something outside the manual. The moment Zenid's bladed hand contacted his shoulder, Ryland yielded completely. He went beyond relaxation. He collapsed into the push, a technique perfected while navigating the violent, unpredictable lurch of a tumbling freighter hull as its internal gravity plates failed. He sank his weight, dropped his center of gravity below Zenid's, and let his hips pivot in a way that looked biomechanically obscene to every trained eye. He turned Zenid's perfectly linear push into a sudden, violent rotation. The tutor's own extended, striking arm, the instrument of 1,000 perfect balance breaks, became a fulcrum, a lever. The galaxy's most revered combat instructor found himself weightless for a fraction of a second. His forearms windmilled in a brief, graceless flurry of surprise before Ryland flipped him clean over his shoulder. He hit the mat with a loud, definitive, and deeply undignified thud. The humming hull went dead. Zenid, looking more shocked than hurt, pushed himself up onto his elbows. The ghost of the impact still vibrated through his biolaminate frame. He stared at the human, who now stood over him, looking apologetic.
"You've done this before?"
Zenid asked, his voice tight, the smooth thrum replaced by a strained rasp. The question carried an accusation. It implied Ryland was a ringer, a master masquerading as a novice. Ryland just shrugged, offering a small, tired grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Nope," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous silence. "I grew up where the rules change between breakfast and lunch. You learn to fall with style." From the back of the awestruck, dumbfounded crowd, another student, a lanky, insectoid being, whispered the question on everyone's mind. "Do all humans know Kung Fu?" The question hung there, a terrifying, paradigm-shifting possibility taking root. Whispers followed Ryland like a wake after class dismissal. He'd transformed from the joke into something far more dangerous, an anomaly. As he headed for the exit, Kachiri Vangars, the Finaran, intercepted him. Her movements were sharp, bird-like, her competitive fire banked by sheer intellectual confusion.
"That exists in no manual,"
she stated, her voice a crisp, analytical chirp.
"I've studied over 300 bipedal martial forms, not advocate for a complete structural collapse as a primary defensive maneuver. The rotational transfer was illogical. You sacrificed your frame."
"My frame's seen worse," Ryland said, rubbing his neck. You should see me parallel park a scavenger drone in a magnetic storm. Now that's a structural sacrifice. Kachiri blinked, her mind failing to find a relevant combat doctrine for parallel parking.
The reference escapes me, but the principle is unsound. You were lucky.
Luck is just probability with a good publicist, Ryland replied, giving her a small smile before moving on. Across the hall, Sariel watched him go. A cold, focused glare that could strip paint replaced her usual condescending purr. This went beyond clever tricks or luck. It was a desecration, like watching someone use a priceless chronometer to hammer a nail. Effective, yes, but an insult to the art, an affront to the very concept of order she and her people held sacred. Before Ryland reached the corridor, a firm hand grabbed his arm. He turned to see an older human with a weathered face, cropped gray hair, and the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too many official reports. He wore the uniform of an advanced tactical command program.
Garrick Thane,
the man said, his voice a low gravel.
I'm the reason they considered a human candidate for this meat grinder.
Ryland Miles, Ryland replied, pulling his arm free. Nice to meet you, I think.
Garrick's face was grim. Congratulations, he said, his voice dropping even lower. You just went from a joke to a weapons-grade variable. This place is more than a school, kid. It's a lab. They test doctrines here. The Vask, the Vathuri, all of them. They send their best to prove their combat philosophies are the most direct, and you just broke their favorite equation.
He leaned closer.
They'll absolutely see what other formulas you can break. You did more than embarrass a teacher. You put a target on the back of our whole species. Don't screw this up.
The weight of Garrick's words settled on Ryland, heavier than any gravity tied back on Larkspur 9. He came here to test himself, to see if the chaotic skills that kept him alive had any value. He didn't realize he'd also be testing humanity itself. The next session was dedicated to light contact drills. The term, Ryland quickly learned, was relative. To the Vathuri, light contact probably meant anything short of immediate dismemberment. The students paired off, moving through prescribed offensive and defensive patterns. It was more a dance than a fight, designed for muscle memory through flawless repetition. Naturally, Sariel singled out Ryland. Her challenge came as a silky question.
Mr. Miles, would you honor me with a demonstration of your unique style?
But the intent behind it was a naked threat. Zenit, observing from a raised platform, inclined his head.
Proceed.
His attention fixed on the human anomaly, a focused, heavy weight in the room. The moment the drill began, Sariel attacked. There was no dance, no prescribed pattern, a blinding, multi-limbed assault, a storm of strikes aimed at every joint and pressure point. Her 4 arms and 2 legs moved with the fluid, unnerving grace of a hunting serpent, each limb striking from an angle that seemed to defy its point of origin. She was a scalpel made of rage and muscle. Ryland knew instantly he couldn't match her. He couldn't block her, parry her, or counterstrike. Meeting her head-on would be like fist-fighting a blender. So he fought differently. He gave ground. He wove backward between the inert, humanoid training dummies that dotted the mat. Sariel pressed forward, her form a whirlwind of controlled violence. But Ryland fought the environment, not her. His salvage-honed spatial awareness took over, his eyes darting over every surface, looking for space and flaws. He saw it instantly. The exposed, hastily patched conduit of an emergency lighting panel near the floor. A sloppy repair job he'd seen 1,000 times on failing freighters, a clear violation of any sane safety code. A perfect system with an imperfect screw. As she lunged again, he dropped, letting his elbow connect firmly with the shoddy panel. The room's lights plunged into a low-light emergency setting for a bare half-second, just enough to disrupt her visual tracking. He used the training dummies as shields, pivots, and obstacles. He instinctively knew the ricochet angle a glancing blow would take off a support strut. He found the one spot on the floor where a cleaning drone left a microscopic film of lubricant and baited her into stepping on it. Her flawless balance faltered for a nanosecond. It was enough. He never landed a single blow. He never threw a punch. But for 3 solid minutes, he made the galaxy's most promising martial artist look clumsy. He turned her powerful attacks into wasted energy. He used her own aggression and the room itself to tie her in knots. The bell chimed, ending the drill. Ryland breathed heavily, sweat stinging his eyes, but he stood untouched. Zariel stood 20 feet away, her body coiled like a spring, her chest heaving. She was also untouched, but the spar ended in a stalemate. For a perfectionist like Zariel, a stalemate against an undisciplined human was a profound, burning humiliation. Her rage solidified, cooling from hot fury into a cold, dangerous resolve to break him. That night, in the quiet solitude of his private study, Instructor Zenid sat before 3 holographic screens. The footage played on a continuous, silent loop. On the left screen, his own undignified fall. In the center, the human's chaotic, brilliant evasion of Zariel's assault. On the right, a close-up of Ryland Miles's face, calm, observant, almost playful in the midst of a lethal exchange. All anger in Zenid was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing, all-consuming obsession. He was a mathematician who discovered a number that broke the fundamental laws of arithmetic. Ryland Miles was a variable that shattered his every equation of combat. He had to understand why. He accessed Iron March Academy's deepest archives, bypassing the standard curriculum files and delving into the restricted ethnographic databases. He keyed in the designation for Ryland's homeworld, Sol 3, call sign Earth. He searched for its martial history, for the codified system that must have produced this anomaly. He searched for the manual on Kung Fu. The archives presented a horrifying, fascinating truth. No single codified human martial art existed. Thousands did. A chaotic, contradictory, nonsensical library of violence. He watched footage of a discipline called karate, all rigid stances, linear power, and bone-shattering strikes. Then he switched to Aikido, a dizzying art of fluid, circular redirection that used an opponent's force against them. He saw the brutal, life-or-death resourcefulness of Krav Maga, a system with only one rule: survive by any means necessary. He witnessed the ground-based leverage of jiu-jitsu, a bizarre form of combat that seemed to ignore striking in favor of joint locks and chokeholds. There was boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, capoeira, savate. Thousands of systems, each developed in a different time, a different place to solve a different problem. Some for dueling, some for war, some for self-defense against multiple attackers in a dark alley. The mess resembled a library where every book was written in a different language, disagreed with the definition of physics, and was actively on fire. To his ordered Vathuri mind, it was madness. Then, as the suns of the binary system Iron March Academy orbited began to rise, the paradigm-shattering realization dawned. Humanity never agreed on one perfect answer, because they never stopped facing new, imperfect questions. Their entire martial philosophy was a decentralized, open-source project for survival, constantly evolving, branching, failing, and adapting. They discarded old answers by adding them to the chaotic pile and innovating.
Ryland Miles was a product of a philosophy of chaos, not an anomaly. Instructor Zenit leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screens reflecting off his polished face. He understood, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that a system built on one perfect answer has no defense against a species with 1,000,000 different ones, and a willingness to invent 1,000,000 more on the fly. At the start of the next week, the atmosphere in the training hall had shifted. The whispers about Ryland were gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Zenid had them running through the same foundational drills, but Ryland felt a change in the tutor's gaze. It was intensely analytical, like a scientist studying a fascinating but potentially explosive chemical reaction. They practiced a series of blocks against a simulated opponent. The hard light projection was a generic biped, its attacks timed to a perfect metronomic rhythm. After the third run-through, Ryland lowered his hands. "Instructor," he said, his voice cutting through the rhythmic slaps of limbs against light. Zenid turned his full attention to him. "Yes, Mr. Miles?" "This is great," Ryland said, gesturing to the holographic attacker. "Very predictable. It's great if your opponent agrees to stand still on a perfectly flat surface and attack you at regular intervals." Zariel, partnered with another Vask across the room, shot him a venomous glare. "Out on the rigs, the ground was never where you left it. The things trying to kill you were never polite enough to take turns." A few students gasped at the sheer audacity of questioning Iron March Academy's methods. Kachiri looked at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. Zariel looked like she might vibrate apart with fury. But Zenid offered no reprimand. To the shock of the entire class, he inclined his head, a gesture of thoughtful consideration. "An astute observation, Mr. Miles." He strode to the master control panel on the wall. His four hands moved across the surface. "The purpose of these drills is to build a foundation of form from which all else can be built." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "However, a foundation that cannot withstand a tremor is fundamentally flawed." He pressed a final icon.
"New module, Dynamic Environment Response."
The entire training hall seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a low hum, it came alive. The result was immediate pandemonium. The smooth, polished floor panels suddenly tilted, rising and falling in a gentle, unpredictable rhythm, like the deck of a ship on a heavy sea. Hard light barriers, thin as paper but solid as steel, flickered into existence at random, forcing students to halt or change direction instantly. Most disorienting of all, the gravity plates embedded in the floor began to cycle through a range of intensities, from a heavy 1.5 Gs that made every movement a struggle, to a floaty 0.8 Gs that threatened to send you sprawling with a single misstep. "Adapt," Zenit commanded, his voice booming through the now chaotic space. The galaxy's finest young warriors, mastified of their codified forms, stumbled and fell like newborn foals. Their movements, so graceful and powerful a moment ago, were now clumsy, hesitant, and utterly ineffective. Their flawless footwork meant nothing on a floor that refused to cooperate. Their perfect strikes were useless when a wall materialized in front of them. Zariel was furious. She tried to force her technique onto the environment, to impose her will on the chaos. She launched into a complex kata, only to have a sudden gravity shift turn her elegant leap into an undignified heap. Kachiri, ever the analyst,
tried to calculate her way through it, predicting the floor panel tilts and gravity fluctuations. She was repeatedly caught off guard by the sheer randomness of the hard light walls. But Ryland was in his element. A relaxed, focused grin spread across his face. This was a slow day back on Larkspur 9, not a training drill. He moved through the chaos with a fluid, intuitive grace. He surfed the tilting floor, bending his knees and shifting his weight to ride the waves of the shifting panels. He used a sudden spike in gravity to anchor himself for a sharp turn, and a sudden drop to launch himself over a barrier that flickered into his path. He treated the pop-up walls not as obstacles, but as welcome cover, potential ricochet surfaces, and tools. He looked like he was dancing through a hurricane. After the session, Kachiri found Ryland in a quiet alcove overlooking the main training hall. She was bruised, humbled, and her tactical mind was a whirlwind of broken formulas.
Shmi,
she said, without preamble. A raw, genuine curiosity replaced her usual competitive fire. Ryland turned, leaning against the railing. Teach you what? How to fall on your face with style? You seem to be getting the hang of it just fine in there.
No,
she said, shaking her feathered head.
Your perspective, not your moves. My training has taught me how to solve for X, assuming all other variables are constant. You solve for X when all the other variables are on fire.
Ryland chuckled. That's a pretty good way of putting it. He considered her for a moment. He saw the earnest hunger for knowledge in her eyes, the frustration of a brilliant mind hitting a wall it couldn't compute. All right, meet me in training room 8 after lights out. And your formal training gear is too restrictive. Wear something else. They began unofficial training sessions in the dead of night, far from the prying eyes of the faculty and other students. He showed her no katas or stances. He set up scenarios in the simulator. The situation is this, he'd say. You're on a catwalk. A pipe bursts above you, spraying super-cooled coolant. Below you, the floor has given way. 2 security drones advance on you from the only exit. This is basically what happened when the cryotanks on a certain freighter went critical. Go. He taught her the principles he learned from years of salvage work. Borrow the momentum, don't fight it, he'd say, as he showed her how to use a spinning piece of debris to launch herself across a gap. Find the stress fracture, he explained, pointing out how a perfectly armored drone always had a weak point at its main sensor array. The best tool is the one they don't see you holding, he coached, as she learned to use a discarded power cable as a whip to disable an opponent. She was a frustratingly literal student at first, trying to categorize every piece of advice into a new doctrine. But slowly, painstakingly, she began to unlearn her rigidity. She stopped forcing her Finaran forms onto the problems and started looking for the ugly, improvised, but effective solutions. She was beginning to embrace the messy, exhilarating freedom of improvisation. A few days later, Garrick cornered Ryland in the mess hall. He slid a datapad across the table, its screen glowing with encrypted comms intercepts.
You wanted to test yourself, kid? Well, the test results are in, and the whole galaxy is grading your paper,
Garrick said, his voice a low rumble. Ryland scanned the screen. It was a dizzying collection of chatter from military attachés, corporate security analysts, and intelligence agents. He saw messages from the Vask Ascendancy discussing the unforeseen strategic liabilities of doctrinal rigidity in light of Sario's performance. He saw a Finaran warrior caste dispatch praising Kachiri Vangar's unorthodox but effective tactical deviations. Garrick tapped a heavily redacted file.
This is the one you need to worry about. It's a formal request from the Coalition's Advanced Weapons Division, granting instructors in it discretionary authority to modify live-fire training parameters. They want him to assess, and I quote, novel combat methodologies.
Garrick looked up, his eyes hard.
You're the novel methodology, Ryland. You're the experiment, and they just authorized the professor to see what happens when he cranks up the voltage.
The reality of his situation hit Ryland like a sudden drop into a high G well. The stakes were terrifyingly, geopolitically real. Passing or failing was no longer the issue. The rivalry with Sariel was a low, simmering fire that threatened to boil over at any moment. The breaking point came during a high-G sparring session designed to test combat under extreme acceleration. The students were strapped into safety harnesses, fighting in a spherical chamber where the gravity could be shifted and intensified at will. Kachiri, now more confident in her new hybrid style, found herself facing Sariel. The old Kachiri would have been defeated in moments, her light, hollow-boned frame no match for Sariel's relentless assault in a high-G environment. But the new Kachiri was different. She used the gravity instead of fighting it. She anticipated a gravity shift to the floor, dropping into a low stance a split second before the pull intensified, giving her a stable base. She used a sudden lurch to the ceiling to add momentum to a powerful leg sweep. For the first time ever, she outmaneuvered Sariel, scoring a clean point with a clever tail trip that used Sariel's own forward momentum against her. A green light flashed on the scoreboard. Kachiri 1, Sariel 0. The humiliation was a public slap in the face for Sariel. Her control had been undone by a cheap, opportunistic trick. In the next exchange, her movements became sharper, more brutal. She lunged, and as Kachiri moved to parry, Sariel executed a brutally effective but unnecessarily violent throw. It was a technically legal move, a cornerstone of Vask grappling, but she performed it at the exact moment the grav plates were peaking at 3 Gs, a moment of maximum strain. Sariel, a master of the system who'd trained in this chamber for years, would have known the force of the throw, amplified by the gravity spike, was beyond the operational limits of Kachiri's standard-issue safety harness. There was a sharp, ugly crack as the harness regulator overloaded. The tether snapped. Kachiri was thrown into an uncontrolled high-G spin, hurtling toward the padded but still very solid wall of the chamber. A klaxon blared. The standard safety procedure was to freeze, lock down one's limbs, and wait for the system's emergency dampeners to engage. But Kachiri heard Ryland's voice in her head from one of their late-night sessions. When the machine breaks, you move. Trust yourself, never the machine. Instead of freezing in panic, she moved. She fought the violent spin, tucking her limbs in to reduce her rotation, just as he'd taught her in a 0G tumbling simulation. She used her feathered, prehensile tail, fanning it out to act as a crude air brake, fighting the spin. At the last possible second, she angled her body, turning the lethal head-on impact into a jarring but survivable slide along the curved, padded wall. She hit hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her, but her bones remained intact. She slid to a stop on the chamber floor as the gravity field normalized and the alarms shrieked. She was bruised, shaken, and furious, but she was alive. In the stunned quiet that followed the alarm cutting out, Kachiri pushed herself to her feet. She locked eyes with Sariel across the chamber. No one could prove a thing. The official report would read freak malfunction or harness failure. But everyone in that room, especially Zened, whose face was a study in cold fury, had seen the intent. They saw the perfect timing, the excessive force. The academic rivalry was over. The battle lines were drawn. The atmosphere in Iron March Academy grew thick, each student's glance carrying a new weight, every silence between drills feeling charged. Zened, in a move that surprised everyone, suspended the ongoing investigation of Sariel. Instead, he announced Iron March Academy's midterm exam.
The test will be a live-fire team exercise,
he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument.
You'll be deployed to Clathorn 7, a derelict mining outpost in the contested Charybdis asteroid field. Your mission is a search and rescue for a lost geological survey drone. The station's still active automated defense systems will complicate the mission.
He put the team rosters up on the main screen.
Teams have been assigned by a randomized algorithm to test synergistic adaptability.
Ryland stared at the screen. Of course, just his luck. Team Gamma, Kachiri Vangars, Sariel, and Ryland Miles. It was a powder keg with a short, lit fuse, not a team. Sariel, as the highest-ranking student on the team, took immediate command. Aboard the shuttle on approach to Clathorn 7, she laid out a perfect textbook plan of entry, sweep, and extraction. It was based on Iron March Academy's detailed schematics of the station and the known patrol patterns of its Mark IV security drones. It left absolutely no room for error or deviation.
Your plan is flawless,
Kachiri commented, her tone laced with ice.
assuming the station has followed its own schematic for the last 50 years and the drones are in a cooperative mood.
My plan accounts for all probable variables,
Sariel retorted without looking up from her datapad. The plan fell apart within 90 seconds of them stepping off the shuttle. The first corridor on the schematic was a pile of twisted metal, a section of the outer hull peeled back from a micrometeoroid impact years ago. The air was thin, tasting of rust and vacuum. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. Sariel's perfect plan was already obsolete. Worse, the drones ran adaptive, interconnected swarm tactics, not standard, predictable patrol patterns. A single scout drone spotted them, emitted a silent, high-frequency ping, and suddenly, the entire station seemed to wake up. Metal shutters slammed down, cutting off their planned retreat. Drones emerged from hidden alcoves, their movements jerky and unnervingly intelligent, flushing the team down a predetermined corridor straight into a kill zone. This was far beyond the parameters of any standard midterm exam. Miles away, in Iron March Academy's silent, darkened observation room, Instructor Zenid watched the chaos unfold on a dozen monitors. His 4 hands were clasped tightly in front of him. He acted under his new discretionary authority. The experiment had begun. It was time to see if the human's adaptability was a classroom party trick or a genuine strategic weapon.
Status report! Adhere to tactical procedure!
Sariel barked, her voice tight with strain. They were trapped in a narrow maintenance corridor, the screech of approaching drones echoing from both ends. Her doctrine had no answer for this level of unscripted chaos. Her perfect plan was worthless scrap, and she fell back on the only thing she had left: regulations. The plan's dead. Ryland cut her off, his voice shockingly calm in the echoing darkness. Now we get creative. He took command by acting, not by yelling. He was no longer a student in a classroom. He was back home on a dying rig on Larkspur 9, with the bulkheads groaning and only his wits to keep him alive. He ripped a meter-long panel of sheet metal from the wall, testing its weight. Not as good as the port side hatch from a K-class hauler, but it would have to do.
Kachiri, up high!
He ordered, pointing to a lattice of coolant pipes running along the ceiling.
Their optical sensors are optimized for a horizontal plane. They never look up. Sariel, you're the scalpel. Your form is perfect for tight spaces and vital point strikes. Wait for the opening. I'm the distraction.
Before either could argue, he hurled the metal panel down the corridor. It spun through the air and crashed against the far wall with a deafening clang that echoed through the station. As he predicted, the lead drones paused, their sensor arrays swiveling toward the sound. It was the opening they needed. Kachiri, with her hollow bones and powerful legs, leaped and scrambled up into the pipework overhead, vanishing into the shadows. Sariel, her pride warring with her survival instinct, hesitated for only a second before melting back into an alcove, her body coiled and ready. Ryland conducted an orchestra of chaos, not giving traditional orders. He used scrap metal to create diversions. He found an ancient power conduit and, using a piece of rebar as a lever, shorted it out, creating a localized EMP that temporarily scrambled the drones in the forward corridor. He saw a series of stress fractures on a support beam and told Kachiri exactly where to land to make a section of the ceiling crumble, creating a new path. It was ugly. It was desperate. It was utterly brilliant. The remaining drones, their swarm intelligence now focused on the primary source of the chaos, converged on Ryland's position. He desperately led them into a large, circular central processing chamber, the station's dead heart. A huge gamble. He was cornered, with his back to a defunct control console and a dozen angry, weaponized drones closing in. "Zariel, now!" he yelled into his comm. For a split second that stretched into an eternity, Zariel hesitated. She saw the chaotic human, the source of all her frustration and humiliation, about to be overwhelmed and torn to pieces. Her pride screamed at her to let it happen, but her warrior's instinct saw something else. It saw the opening his insane, suicidal gambit had created. By drawing the entire swarm into a tight cluster focused on him, he'd exposed their central command drone, a slightly larger unit hanging back, directing the others. A perfect 1-in-a-million shot, an opening that would last for less than a second. Gritting her teeth so hard her jaw ached, she exploded from cover. She was a blur of motion, a ribbon of pure, deadly action. She crossed the 30 meters of open floor in the time it took the drones to raise their weapon arms. She leaped, using a fallen drone as a springboard, and drove her bladed arm straight through the command drone's glowing optical core. A shower of sparks and a high-pitched electronic scream. The entire swarm froze, their limbs locked in place. Then, one by one, they clattered to the floor, inert and lifeless. A heavy quiet descended on the processing chamber. They stood there, Ryland, Kachiri, and Sariel, breathing heavily in the dust-filled air. They completed the mission, not with perfection, not with doctrine, but with a chaotic, desperate energy that left them all breathless. Back at Iron March Academy, the air was different. Team Gamma had the highest score on the midterm, achieved through the most unorthodox and procedurally horrifying methods ever recorded in Iron March Academy's history. The debriefing had been a short, tense affair. Zinid had simply looked at the three of them, and, for the first time, Ryland saw something akin to pride in the tutor's layered eyes. Later, Ryland and Kachiri found Sariel in an empty training room. She was driving her fists into a reinforced training dummy, each blow a perfect, furious impact that sent shudders through the door.
"Your plan would have gotten us killed,"
Kachiri stated, her voice even. Sariel whirled on them, her chest heaving, a dangerous glint in her eyes.
"My plan was perfect. The scenario was flawed."
She strode toward Ryland until she was inches from his face.
"That mess, that failure you call a strategy, it shouldn't have worked."
Her voice dropped into a seething hiss.
"By every metric, by every law of combat geometry, we should be dead. The fact that we aren't is an insult, a flaw in reality itself."
She was furious that the universe had betrayed her perfect model, not admitting he was right. The crack in her worldview was a raw, festering wound. The day of the final exam arrived. The entire Crucible was present, along with high-ranking military observers from a dozen galactic powers. The atmosphere was electric. Zenid stood in the center of the vast final arena, a space the size of a small shuttle bay.
"The final test is the gauntlet,"
he announced, his voice amplified throughout the arena.
"A tournament of single combat. Standard rules of engagement apply. A contestant is defeated if they are incapacitated, forced to yield, or exit the designated combat area. The winner will be named first pupil of this crucible."
He paused, his gaze sweeping over the finalists, Sariel, Ryland, and a handful of other top students who'd survived the chaos drills and the midterm. His eyes landed on Ryland.
"A new rule exists this year,"
Zenid declared, a hint of something revolutionary in his tone.
"The environment is in play."
At his command, the flat, sterile floor of the arena transformed. Panels rose to form shifting platforms of varying heights. Flickering energy walls materialized and vanished like ghosts. Localized gravity wells pulsed into existence, their distortions visible in the air. The perfect dueling ground had become a landscape of absolute chaos. The semifinals pitted Kachiri against Sariel. It was a rematch everyone had been waiting to see. The old Kachiri would have been defeated in moments, her elegant Finarin style no match for Sariel's raw power. But this was the new Kachiri. She fought with a brilliant, unpredictable blend of her traditional training and Ryland's chaotic opportunism. She avoided meeting Sariel head-on. She used the shifting platforms to create new angles of attack, leaping from rising panel to strike from above. She feinted toward an energy wall, baiting Sariel into an attack, only for the wall to vanish, leaving Sariel overextended. She was a whirlwind of feathers and calculated risks. It was a spectacular fight, a beautiful dance of order and chaos. In the end, Sariel's raw, overwhelming power and aggression won out. She caught Kachiri in a complex joint lock and forced a yield. But Kachiri left the arena with her head held high, not in shame. She'd earned a standing ovation from the crowd, and more importantly, a nod of grudging, silent respect from Sariel. Then came the final battle. Ryland Miles versus Sariel. The token human against the Vask prodigy. The salvage diver against the living weapon. Radical adaptability versus methodical brilliance. A hush fell over the crowd as they stepped into the dynamic, ever-changing arena. Sariel attacked without a signal, without waiting for the environment to settle. She was a relentless storm of strikes, a four-armed, two-legged tempest of martial perfection. She was faster, stronger, and technically flawless. Ryland was immediately on the defensive. He was a ship caught in a hurricane, using every ounce of his skill, every trick he knew, just to survive the initial onslaught. He blocked, parried, and dodged, but he was driven back, forced to give ground as Sariel pressed her overwhelming advantage. Ryland knew, with absolute certainty, he could never win a direct exchange. It would be like a salvage cutter trying to outpunch a hydraulic press. Sooner or later, her technique would find a flaw in his improvised defense, and it would be over. So, he changed the nature of the fight. He stopped fighting her. He started playing the arena itself, with Sariel as a very angry, very deadly piece on the board. He broke contact and vaulted over a low wall. The fight became a grueling chase. He led her through the shifting maze, forcing her to expend energy navigating the treacherous terrain while he flowed through it like water. He used the flickering walls not just for cover, but to redirect her momentum, forcing her to check her charges. He used the changing gravity wells not just to evade, but to augment his leaps, making him seem to teleport from one platform to another. He was conducting, not reacting. Every move he made was designed to subtly, deliberately maneuver her. He made her think each attack, each lunge, each step was her own aggressive choice, while he secretly herded her, like a sheepdog with a very pissed-off wolf, toward one specific spot in the arena. He made his final move. He leaped onto a high, isolated platform at the arena's edge, a space with no cover and no escape route. He appeared trapped, his back to the boundary line. The bait. Sariel saw it. Victory was at hand. The chaotic human had finally run out of tricks, out of room to run. With a cry of triumphant fury, she launched herself across a chasm in a final, perfect, unstoppable lunge. Her body was a spear, her lead arm a sharpened point aimed directly at his chest. The same flawless, linear technique Zenid tried to use on him that very first day. A perfect solution to a simple problem. A stationary target. But Ryland wasn't the target. The space he occupied was. At the very last second, as her bladed hand was inches from his heart, Ryland dropped. He bent his knees and kicked off the platform's edge, pushing himself downwards, accelerating his fall through the narrow gap between platforms he had been clocking the entire match. A gap he knew, based on the arena's shifting rhythm, would be there at that exact moment. Sariel's attack, committed and perfect, found nothing but empty air. Her unstoppable momentum carried her clear across the chasm. She landed on the deactivated floor outside the arena boundary, spinning into a perfect three-point combat stance, ready to re-engage. But it was too late. A loud, final buzzer echoed through the arena. A holographic red line appeared between her and the fighting platform she'd just left. Ryland landed softly on a platform below, breathing easily. He'd struck her 0 times. He just looked at her, standing alone outside the ring in a state of furious, bewildered defeat. The roar of the arena died, leaving a vacuum where sound had been. Hanging in that quiet, Sariel finally understood. Her relentless, single-minded pursuit of perfection had made her utterly, fatally predictable. She had been so focused on executing the perfect move that she never questioned if it was the right move. A moment of absolute, stunned quiet, and then the arena erupted in a deafening roar. The observers were on their feet. The students were cheering, chanting his name. Ryland Miles, the token human, the salvage diver from a backwater moon, was the victor of Iron March Academy. Later, in his private office, Zenid showed Ryland the holovid of the final match, slowed to a crawl.
Remarkable,
the tutor said, and for the first time Ryland heard genuine, undiluted admiration in his voice.
You defeated the geometry of the fight, not the warrior. You understood the system better than she did.
He swiped the image away and pulled up a schematic for a new curriculum. It was filled with modules like adaptive environmental response, chaotic systems theory, and improvised tactical solutions.
Iron March Academy is changing, Zenith said. I am changing. Your performance has invalidated a century of our core doctrine.
He looked at Ryland.
I'd like you to stay as a junior tutor. Help me build this new paradigm.
The offer was staggering. A chance to reshape the martial philosophy of the entire galaxy. And it was only one of dozens. His private inbox was flooded with lucrative military contracts, corporate security offers, and invitations from galactic powers wanting to study the human anomaly. Ryland found Garrick overlooking the now empty main training hall, watching the maintenance drones scrub the floor. He told Garrick about the offers, and how he'd turned every single one of them down. Garrick raised a skeptical eyebrow.
Do you know how much money and influence you just walked away from? You could have written your own ticket.
Ryland leaned against the railing, a wry, confident grin spreading across his face. They all want the same thing, he said. They want to put me in a box. They want to study me, analyze me, and write a manual about what I did so they can replicate it. The thing is, I did nothing that was in a manual. I'm not a weapon system. He looked down at the new class of first-year students filing into the hall below. He saw dozens of species, all looking nervous and determined. And among them, assisting Zenid with a basic balance drill on a slightly tilting floor, was Kachiri. I just figured out I'm good at this, Ryland said, a new kind of purpose in his voice. I have yet to learn what this even is. The galaxy thought it wanted perfect soldiers, flawless weapons forged in a rigid crucible. Ryland Miles was going to show them they needed something else entirely. They needed to learn how to fail, how to improvise, and how to get back up when the plan goes to hell. For humanity, and for the galaxy, this was just the beginning.